Okay, welcome to weha.com, this week's weekly roundtable hosted by me, John Lyons, and joined as usual by Ronnie Newton, the managing editor of weha.com. Hello, Ronnie, how are you?
I'm doing fine, thank you. Thanks. It's a
Super.
little humid here.
It is, yeah, we do have a little bit of humidity. Tomorrow's going to be a lot nicer, but I don't have my weather hat on right now. I've got my news hat
Okay,
on.
okay, good.
And tonight we have two really fantastic guests we're very excited to have. First of all, we've got Mayor Shari Cantor, the mayor of West Hartford, Connecticut. And we also have the chief of police, Chief Vernon Riddick. Mayor Cantor, Chief Riddick, thank you both for coming on. Um, I'd like to just kick off and kind of open it up with you, Mayor Cantor, and what I'm going to call the mayor's notebook. Tell us what's going on. It has not exactly been quiet around here the last 3 months or 2 weeks for that matter. And what's going on? What's on your mind?
Yeah, this is so we were just marking 3 months actually of when the governor declared a state of emergency, and then the governor declared on March 10th, and the town of West Hartford, I declared a state of emergency on March 15th, giving our town manager increased authority to make decisions and to hopefully do what we need to do to keep our community safe. So it has been extremely active, collaborative, and we're very lucky to live in a town like West Hartford that actually I think has been either on or ahead at every point. I know the chief will probably talk to some of this, but we initially there was an incident command center set up, then a emergency response team that was also set up. We have an executive team that was meeting daily, and now we're meeting every other day to talk about, and it's collaborative with our superintendent of schools, our health department, our corporation council, and then our emergency, our two chiefs and our emergency coordinator, and how that collaboration has helped us to, obviously the town manager is the chair of that, it coordinates us all and communicates, so we're all hearing the same facts, we're all able to make decisions in an educated way. And that really worked for a good amount of time until things stabilized a little bit. And we knew that the recovery piece, we were still responding, and we still are responding as we recover. And we are, I call it an adaptive recovery phase. Actually, it was a phrase that one of my colleagues used, and I think that's really an appropriate phase. And we knew that we needed to coordinate more with our community and other non-government organizations, nonprofits, et cetera, to help creative thinking and to make whatever is possible. I've talked about government is always set up for a government of probability with little chance of failure, oftentimes little chance of ideas sometimes. And so moving from that government of probability to the government of possibility and what we can do. And I think some people are seeing that in what we've done with our outdoor dining in West Hartford Center. And there's many, many examples of what we're doing to respond and be innovative. But we have those two committees, but I will say all of our executive teams, we start with the health data. So we know what's going on. And that is what has been a driver for us. This frustrating thing is that the data has been murky a little bit because there's been changes at the state level, primarily in the nursing home population and the numbers that come from there. So it's been a little bit hard for us to, there's a trend, the trend's definitely down, but one day there'll be an up, and it's because there's a backlog. It's not because there's a lot of new cases. We also, our health department has been contact tracing since the beginning of this pandemic, and prior to this pandemic, actually. And contact tracing, our non-public school nurses are employed by our health department, and they pivoted to doing more contact tracing. So we have been doing that. Initially it was from travel, and then it became community spread and where those spreads were happening. And so our health department feels very good about about what they do, and they feel like if there was a hot spot in town, if there was an area, they would identify it and we would know about it, which is very comforting for us in leadership to understand that anybody that was first responding to an area or are people exposed to an area. So we're trying to stay on top of all that coordination as we also open a little bit. That has been very important partnership with all of us. We also have what's called the CLASP system, which I know Ronni has written about, and a coordinated program between our fire department and our social services agency and health department to make sure that we are going out to people that are vulnerable and responding to them. And then I could talk more about that over time. But I wanted to talk about the advisory committees because I think that's an important piece for our public to understand. The council normally has standing committees, and they're broken up: a public safety committee and a economic development committee, and a those of our public works. We have one. So we wanted to flatten that and make it and be more interactive. And we've just started to get to the point where I think the engagement from the community is really starting. I've received a lot of emails on ideas and giving them to staff, and they're flushing them through. One was to expand our bike loops, so it would include the Trapper Trail. That was today. And we've talked about more offerings for engagement with our youth that are going to be very under engaged through the summer. And that is both employable youth and student age children that are, so we're really working hard on that. We know there's a lot of risk factors. Socialization is critical. And we're trying to figure out how best, in a way that we're, is not putting too much of a burden on taxpayers, that we're being able to respond. But the first overall arching is keeping our community safe, right? So it all has to be within the CDC guidelines, the state of Connecticut's guidelines as well. But I just want to read I'm going to read the special advisory committee. The first one we established was economic workforce recovery shall be responsible for reevaluating the needs of West Hartford's businesses, nonprofits, and workforce as a result of the pandemic of COVID-19, including but not limited to the following industries: and restaurant and hospitality, arts and culture, entertainment and leisure services, professional and business services, construction and building trades, property management, transportation, and healthcare services. And then the other committee is our committee on social and community recovery, and that is responsible for evaluating quality of life issues, including but not limited to social needs with regards to physical health, mental well-being, food security, childcare, education, technology access, transportation, and at-risk populations. And those are pretty comprehensive. And counselors are assigned and can come to either and be involved in either. And we're meeting Monday nights at 6 to 8 p.m. And hopefully, again, if anybody has input, we're happy to hear it. This is not, we have to FOI, we have to go through an agenda, but we want it to be as informal and as welcoming and inclusive as we can possibly be. So that's really the COVID related pieces. And then with all, we all, I think, have been awakened to the incredible systemic injustices that have existed in our society for since before our country was born, since 1619. And we have a lot to learn, and we have a lot of listening to do. And so I think what has been so truly heartbreaking is that action hasn't been taken sooner, and there's been so many instances where action could have been taken. But you know what? Right now, I see an engagement like I've never seen in my lifetime. Even civil rights, in a way, that the '60s. I was very young, but to the degree I'm inspired by our youth engagement. I'm inspired by people that I never thought would see things in the way that they are seeing the depth and the importance of change. And this is so important, and how important I think I'm learning every day of the health impacts of microaggressions on communities of color, especially Black Americans, and how it produces premature births and the stress actually affect. So all the things that we're learning along the way, and we're going to have those really important community discussions. So I've been talking to our town historian, Tracy Wilson, through Jennifer DeColomatos, the No Webster House, and we will be starting, I hoped for it to be a long series. You know, we talked about task force, and I said, so this is not a task force. This is a long-term, all-in, again, very inclusive, very very welcoming, and engaging discussions that we as a community absolutely have to have. From the education to healthcare to food insecurity or security, to wealth accumulation and planning, job availability and workforce readiness, across the board, everything. So we have, again, a lot of work to do. And what I have seen, and I know the chief will speak to this as well, is our community is ready, and they're really, really ready to talk about a lot of difficult topics, but they're ready to engage, and they're ready to help in every and all ways. I just want people to be respectful of all opinions, and to be honest, and really reflect on the facts. Have to come from history. So that's all that I would ask. So I appreciate your doing this and helping to engage our public, because that is so critical. And with that, I don't know if you have any questions for me.
Ronni, any questions? I've got a few.
Wow. Go ahead.
Okay, you covered a lot, so I almost feel a little guilty backing up off of what's really been on the front page here the last 2.5 weeks. But going back to COVID, you know, I know you have a lot of contact with the governor's office, and I know the governor has a lot of contact with his counterparts around the country. You know, what are your fears? What are your concerns? And what are your thoughts with respect to, you know, these flare-ups that we're starting to see in some of the states that either didn't have enough restrictions or lifted their restrictions very early?
So I think the dynamic, and always all healthcare professionals and our health department director said, if you open up while cases are going up, you are really lighting a match, right? To a gas-soaked rag. You know, I mean, it's like you're just heating everything. And I think everybody saw that, the matchstick where it burns, and then you have, that's how the community spreads, and then you have one that's out and it just stops, right? So if you're bringing people together at a time when you're still in that increasing phase, you're going to expand it in an exponential way. And the same thing with, so that's really a problem. But you also have to have that hospital readiness, and that is something that I think the governor's been really on top of. And then testing, I think we've been a little behind with the amount of testing, and people seem a little resistant. But also, you know, the gateway of testing, that you need to go see a licensed medical person before, whether it's a doctor or a PA or something. That's been a little bit more difficult. So I think we are better at our testing than we were. Contact tracing, we've always been doing well with it. Really, things picked up a lot. I don't know if we would be equipped enough, but we think we would be. And then just, you know, making sure that we're monitoring what's happening, hospital positive cases, making sure that you're in that, you know, 10 to 12%, no more than that. And then, you know, keeping up with the hospitals and all that. So I am nervous that there are certain areas that are opening. And as I think Dr. Fauci said, when it goes around the world in 3 months, nobody is protected, because we're mobile people, and you know we are all exposed. So masks do work, and I'm disappointed it took the CDC so long to come out with that directive. But it is something, when I wear my mask to protect you, and you wear your mask to protect me, and that's a really important. At least over 70% of reduction in spread from 2 dual wearing masks, and the better the mask, the better. If you're in N95, it's much better. So those are all really important things. Obviously, the PPE, making sure that we have that for all people that are in those exposure kind of areas. So I think Connecticut's done a good job. I really do. But we're not protected, and we're part of this country. And if other areas speed up and then people travel, it's, it could potentially pick right up again. And we have to be ready to pivot on a dime.
Yeah.
We really do.
Especially
So,
as the summer season is coming, and people will be maybe not traveling as far as they otherwise would, but traveling to the shoreline or traveling into Connecticut from New York or New Jersey, or I went to Massachusetts last weekend. I'm sure you're going to go to Massachusetts, Shari, at some point,
Yep.
if you haven't been yet. But but I mean, that's also something that makes it a little harder for us to control too, is even within the state, if we're doing a good job, we're dealing with outside influences that are a little harder to control.
Exactly.
two more questions regarding COVID. Number one, we've got a question from Angeline Ionao. I hope I got that name right.
Angie, just call her Angie.
Yeah, Angie. Thank you, Angie. Thank you, Ronnie. Inquiring
She lives
minds
behind me.
want to know about the plans for the school next year. I know this is probably premature, my asking you. I apologize, but people are asking, and I want to show the respect of conveying their questions to you.
So this is obviously would go through the superintendent of schools, and just recently he said there's still multiple scenarios out there. He strongly, I think he believes that there will be some form of opening, but what that opening is going to look like is far from ready to communicate in any way. I don't think it's been formed yet. I know I'm a trustee at UConn, and I know that the plans have come out with UConn, and a lot of that is really, I mean, it's going to be different. It's going to feel different, and there's concern that educators that are exposed to multiple classes of children in some grades would be more at risk, and that has an impact. So we're gonna have to be very creative in how we as a community, if there are certain grades that aren't going to school still, what we can do to engage and to enrich, because I'm not sure our facilities right now can't handle half, but we don't know. Bottom line, we don't know. There'll be something, but we don't know.
How are we doing in the center? Are you happy? How are things going in the center from your perspective?
Yeah. So overall, I'm very happy. I think there's a few accommodations we need to make. We need to make sure that people that might not be able to walk, first of all, people are having trouble getting around and breathing. They probably shouldn't be in the center right now during a pandemic anyway. But the retail and the food establishments have had a little bit of a struggle with accessibility and parking. There's a lot of parking around our center. We actually have a great inventory of parking around our center. So, but people don't want to walk. And so they should really, I mean, those vibrant centers always have peripheral parking and walkable centers. So that's something I hope we get used to. But we know that convenience is important, and we think that there are creative ways to make that happen. We had passed a ped bike ordinance for pedicabs, and so if somebody wanted to have a pedicab company, apart from the town, I don't think the town can really do that, but that's a great way to raise some money and could be a really wonderful addition to the center. We've talked about whether there's little carts or some kind of shuttle kind of a thing. If somebody's picking up takeout food and they can't park, maybe there's a pickup area that we could coordinate. So we're going to keep reinventing and talking about things and how they can be better. This was a quick, put the corrals up, get people out. Some people think the corrals are too big. Some think they're too small. Some are so beautified with flowers. Others have work to do. Some have umbrellas, some don't. So it's just interesting watching how each establishment is doing their own, each owner is handling it in their own way. But I think most of the people that I have spoken with are thrilled with it, but I do get repetitive concerning comments about people not wearing masks, and that's really important. And wearing a mask in the center, you cannot control how far you are going to be from another person. So wear a mask, protect them, and let them protect you. They're not protecting you when they're not wearing a mask. So wear a mask. We are increasing our signage around town. Our health department is handing out masks. They've been working with the establishments to remind them, but we're going to be out on the street more to reminding people that this is what we need to do to keep the vibrancy. Otherwise, we might have to shut down. So let's not go there. I don't want to go there again. Let's keep this open. So wear a mask.
I couldn't agree more. I don't want to get political here, even though you are a politician, I know that, but it has been very frustrating for me personally seeing some of the mixed messaging, and I am grateful to you, and I'm grateful to Governor Lamont, because I think your messaging has been incredibly consistent, and as you just proved again, wear a darn mask. So,
Well, the governor's office today in the press conference came out, they actually put out a new video, which was kind of cute, but and they said it's not meaning to be cute, but it is meant to be catchy. And the theme was, if you have to ask, wear a mask. So when you're ordering a meal, when you're, running into a store to pick something up, when you're walking down the street, if you're not a good distance away from someone and not outside or not in your house with your family, wear a mask. Even if it's hot out, even if you don't like it, we need to do this for each other.
Yeah.
Right.
We've got to look after each other. So, Ronnie, any more questions for the mayor? Because I'd like to pivot to Chief Riddick.
Yeah, no, not right now. And I know that I see one question that's come in for the chief, but I think it's important.
I see one too. I don't know if we're looking at the same one, but
yeah, from Eric Bergen. Yep.
So, okay, good. We're looking at the same stream.
Yep.
Terrific. Wonderful. Good. So I'll let you handle that when we get there. So Chief Riddick, thank you for coming on. Ronnie and I covered the first of the two rallies. I think it was 2 weeks ago now. We're almost 2 weeks ago.
Actually, no, it was just a week ago. Not even a week ago, John.
Gosh. I'm sorry. I've lost track of time.
I know it's gone by really quickly. It was last Tuesday. I'm sorry.
Tuesday.
So a week and a day ago.
And I think I speak for you, Ronnie, when I say the most requested part of what we covered of that entire rally, and it was all incredible, was your speech. I had multiple requests, including one from our mayor. And I know Ronnie had multiple requests as well. I thought your speech was so powerful. And if I can, could I ask you to talk about your background, your history, and your experience with the police as a child? Because I thought that was some powerful things that you said. It really opened my eyes to something that I'm embarrassed to admit I was really unaware of.
Thank you, and thank you for this opportunity on this evening. For lack of a better term, we call it a speech, but it was just me. I didn't prep. It was just speaking from the heart. And when you're talking about life experiences, you don't have to prep. You just talk from your heart, and that's what I did. And the other funny part, you say the life experiences and the negative implications. There's been a lot of great experiences in my life personally, from all different races. Ethnicities, it really has, but we just can't deny, I can't deny the overwhelming feeling. And it's funny that the mayor mentioned the microaggressions, the fancy terminology now, which I didn't know what it was when I felt when I was younger, when I was one of two maybe in a classroom, and you talk about history, and the only history you learn about is Martin Luther King and slavery, and that's it, and you feel less than. The talk, the one thing that we hear about, and it's become commonplace now, you hear from minorities, specifically African-American males, is the talk that you get from your parents that's passed on. The talk has been around for centuries. The talk has been around since the 1600s when slavery started. The talk was, don't look the slave owner or the master in the eye. Don't dare even glance towards the master or the slave owner's wife. As years go forward, you have Jim Crow. If you're walking down the sidewalk, keep your head down. Don't look, cross the street, bow, deference throughout the years. So you go from we have Jim Crow through the early 1900s, 1950s and 60s. You have Emmett Till in between there, and what occurred with him. For whistling at a white woman, and turned out later she admitted that she made it up. No justice, no type of, as I mentioned in the speech before, the blind lady of justice was peeking throughout all those years. In between, I have family members going way back who served in various wars, but relatives in World War II. And this is, very important because all these things show examples of how the government and the extension of the government has always been law enforcement for segregation. When you have World War II veterans and you have German POWs and they're brought stateside and the African American soldiers are spit on and beat in uniform and killed in uniform, all documented. These are things that happen. So when people say, our flag, yes, America is the greatest country in the world. You won't ever hear me say that, but that flag doesn't mean the same thing to a lot of people. So imagine you have a German POW, you come back stateside, and the German POW gets to eat in a restaurant that you can't. Just think about that. Think about that for a moment. You're fighting for freedom for a country that you can't even be free for. And if we go backwards, and I'm jumbling just a little bit, if you go back to the Civil War, and again, where many slaves were promised freedom if they fought, especially in the South, it was a lie, as we know, and to fight for freedom that you can't even get. And that's passed down from generation to generation. Now, you go to Jim Crow, segregation, being spit on as a soldier. You can't go into a restaurant. And then even you go to some of the quote unquote concentration camps that they had for the German prisoners in the South, Mississippi and the like. And they are allowed to go into town again and to eat. And you are a soldier, a black soldier, and you don't have that same right. Law enforcement. We can't deny this anymore. And I think, and people thought I was being cavalier when I make some of these comments and all this attention to George Floyd, which was probably one of the most heinous acts I've ever seen in my life. And, I've been in law enforcement for 27 years, and I'm not being graphic, but I've seen people who've been shot in the head. I've seen people who've been shot in the chest. I've seen people who've been stabbed. I've seen dead babies. I've seen victims of sexual assault. You name it. I've seen decapitations. All these things in motor vehicle accidents. Seen it all. And I couldn't watch that video. It took me 3 attempts before I could watch that video. 3. What does that tell you? That's how heinous it was. But again, for most of us in the African American community, it was just another example of a black person, specifically a black male, being mistreated by law enforcement. And thank the good Lord, it was caught on camera, and now it's pretty much indisputable. Had it not been, as we saw, and not being disrespectful to Buffalo, New York, but don't forget that first report that came out was that 74-year-old or 75-year-old white male tripped walking backwards. And we all know he was pushed. That puts such a stain on law enforcement. It really, really does. And the pressure on us. So going forward, I had to talk. As my dad told me, be very cooperative with law enforcement. If you get pulled over, stop, answer the questions. Don't be argumentative. Even if you believe you're right, just consider yourself wrong because you want to get home. You don't want to have a nightstick on the side, as he would say in the Southern terms, upside your head and the like. So that was a relationship, going up. And the funny irony is my father was interviewed by a local reporter back in Waterbury where my brother and I had gotten promoted on the same night. I was getting promoted to captain. I believe he was getting promoted to lieutenant. And my dad says, I preached to my kids all these years to be careful about police. And my father said, I don't really like officers that much based upon how he was treated. He said, now look how karma comes around. I got 2 of them in the police department. But he always told us to stand for what's right. Both of us, God rest my brother's soul, he died 10 years ago this year of brain cancer at the age of 42. But we got into law enforcement to make a difference. You can stand by the sidelines and make accusations and point your finger, so you can try and be involved and make a change. I'm pleased to say the majority of the officers I've come across, and most of them, because law enforcement is over 90% white and probably higher to that, white males, I've seen white males put their lives on the line for people who did not look like them, and probably sometimes people they didn't even like, but I've seen it happen. I work with officers who've been drugged by cars, who've been beaten up, who've been, spit on. These things happen, but they come to work and they do their job each and every day. So a little long-winded. I apologize, and I actually jumbled around a little place. But I understand the pain of the African American community. I do. I feel it. If I can be truly honest, when I'm not dressed like this and I'm driving, I can get concerned. If I get pulled over, I'm nervous. They won't know who I am. I'm a big guy. I might be considered a threat. And statistics have shown, and studies have shown that many times Black males are seen and perceived to be larger than what they are and more aggressive than what they might appear to be. Most recently, and I didn't share this, I try every time I speak to share a different occurrence so I don't repeat the same things over and over. But most recently, probably a year or so ago, I don't drink alcohol, but I do like non-alcoholic beers. I like the taste. So I went into a liquor store to get my beverage. And it's funny, if it wasn't funny, you start crying. So I walked through, I started to walk to the back. There's a gentleman who was a worker on the whole entire side of the store who was sweeping. Because I observed, because I'm a law enforcement, I just checked my surroundings. And by the time I got to the other side of the store to the case, he was sweeping right next to me. And I wanted to say, excuse me, brother, can you be a little bit more obvious? Or, I mean, can you play it off just a little bit, maybe? But these are things that happen. You go into a store, then all of a sudden you can see people start watching you. They don't know how much money you make or how much you invested or what your background is. You're just assumed to be negative or assumed to be up to no good. So that was very briefly some experiences. I've been called the N-word numerous times growing up as a kid. You don't belong in this neighborhood. It's just these things happen. You learn to deal with it.
I'm not sure what I even can say after listening to that, but I think I'll ask a somewhat obvious question. Now, as as formerly the chief of the Waterbury Police Department, which is much more of an urban environment as compared to West Hartford, but now in West Hartford too. How has that made you better at your job, and how are you bringing your experiences to the rest of the police force?
One of the most, in my opinion, my humble opinion, one of the most difficult jobs in America is to be a police officer. The only thing, in my opinion, more difficult than that is to be a Black police officer in a minority or an urban setting. Many times you were not considered, Black enough for your community and not blue enough for law enforcement because you're not really trusted and people think you might be going back telling secrets to the community. So that's difficult. It really, really is. Over the years, I've shared my experiences, mostly in group settings, smaller settings, not necessarily publicly. It wasn't until the last year or so when I started sharing some things publicly. And truthfully, you don't want to be branded as unfortunately, if you start sharing these things, well, is he making it up? He's a race baiter. He's trying to play the race card. No, this really happens. What am I gaining by sharing these experiences? I'm just trying to educate and to let you know that everybody that talks about these situations aren't making it up. When you try to have these difficult dialogues about race, it's not easy. America needs healing, but what we forget sometimes, and we've all been a kid and we've fallen and hurt ourselves, but when you have a cut, you have to put antiseptic in there. You have to clean it, and that hurts. And that burns, but you have to clean the wound first before it can heal. And that's what we're going the process right now. We are trying to heal, but right now we're in the burning phase. And that's me the acknowledgement of what's going on. So, Ronnie, as I did in Waterbury, as I did here when I first came to West Hartford, I told my command staff that because of the way I look and my experiences, some things are going to be different. Some things I say might be perceived a certain way. And my perception, because of my life experiences, might come a certain way. But one thing we will do, we will have these difficult conversations in these staff meetings. We are going to talk about race. We're going to talk about the relationship between the police department and the minority community, because we will be better. And the way you get better is have an open discourse and exchange of ideas and conversations so we can have an expansion and have growth. So a lot of these situations that have occurred over the past 2 years, we will play the video during our staff meeting. We'll point to it and talk about some strategic, some tactical errors that were made. A couple of the recent shootings that occurred within the past 12 months. We played the videos during the staff meetings, then subsequently had the supervisors speak to our patrol officers at roll calls regarding what you can do or what you should do and should not do. So I think my experience has helped people understand that there is a different lens. And lastly, Ronnie, and again, I apologize for being so long-winded, but it's hard to be succinct when these things, you can't take bits and pieces. I think it's very important for non-Black police officers to understand when you go to a motor vehicle and sometimes you see a minority, specifically a Black person in the car, and they're extremely nervous. It's not just because you might think it's because of drugs or they're intoxicated. A lot of times because of what you represent by the uniform, not you personally, but what that uniform represents based upon the conversations of decades of conversations from your parents and grandparents, are to be careful and to be concerned about police officers.
So many questions and so many thoughts, Chief Riddick, and I'm grateful for what you're sharing with us tonight. What, you said in your introduction that the vast majority, and forgive me, it's not an exact quote, but the vast majority of the police officers you've met in your career have been good ones. But, and I think you use these words, but there were a few bad apples. How do we change hiring practices, vetting? What can be done? What do you do? What do you suggest is done, not only in West Hartford, which I think by and large has a great police force, but nationally, and especially maybe in some of these communities that aren't nearly as open-minded or progressive as our community?
Well, it starts from the top. And you mentioned I've come across some bad apples. Well, I've fired some bad apples. I've suspended some bad apples. When I was in Waterbury and Internal Affairs, I did investigations that led to terminations and suspensions. You got to be willing to make those hard decisions and do appropriate and proper investigations. The one thing I will say, especially in the Northeast, I think we do a really good job of vetting our personnel. We really do. It is hard to become a police officer in the Northeast. It's a little different Midwest and South. They don't have the same criteria. You have to pass a written exam, an oral board, a psychological exam, and during that psychological exam, you're asked questions regarding race. A polygraph, again, you're asked questions on racism, sexism, all these things, and hopefully you pass, and those are indicators, but if they are, you don't pass. We also have a background investigation where our professional standards detectives and personnel, they speak to neighbors, former employers, former spouses, former significant others. We really do a really deep dive to make sure we're getting the best qualified people with no hidden agenda. And then lastly, there is a physical that you have to pass. There's a physical agility too, I forgot about that. But as far as picking up things, we really do a good job. Now what happens is, so you go through that, you go to the academy, we have to acknowledge, and I think you've seen a lot more police chiefs and police executives talk about this now, there's a police culture that's out there. And some of you have heard me say that culture will trump great policy. You can have the best policies in the world, but if your leadership and your personnel know that it's just something on paper, it's not something you live, you value, that you believe, then you get Minnesota. Not casting dispersion, but that's a culture. There's no ifs, ands, and buts about it. Did you get to Ferguson? That's a culture. Baltimore, that's a culture. On and on and on. It takes strong leadership and people are willing to follow, and officers are willing to stand up for righteousness and justice to make a change and to stand out.
Ronnie, do you want to? I've got more questions, but I don't want to dominate here.
Well, I was going to stray slightly off topic. So the other night at the public safety meeting, you went through the 8 can't wait and talked about some of the questions or some of the issues that are going to be considered possibly, oh, now the sun's coming in my window here, by and I don't have any shades, the police accountability task force, and then yesterday some recommendations came out. I was wondering if you could speak to those. I know you talked about use of force, and went through some, and I'm going to put it in the story as soon as I have a couple of minutes to do that, or I should say a couple of hours to do that, because I don't want to take this issue lightly. But after you talked about some of your thoughts about those ideas, the task force has a little bit of a different take on those. What is your reaction to that? Or if you haven't seen those recommendations, I don't have them in front of me, but they did recommend prohibiting chokeholds. And what just happened here, John?
Ronnie, I think I was able to share it. Are you there?
Yep,
Yes.
I'm here.
Okay. Do you see it on the screen?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to leave it up. I can't see.
Oh,
the
okay.
screen.
Okay. Now I see what that is. Okay. I had no idea what you were doing there.
I
But anyway,
apologize. Trying to be helpful.
they've made some recommendations, and I was just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I'll go to probably the most controversial one first. Actually, back up. First, the 8 can't wait. I'm very proud of the West Hartford Police Department. That predates me. That actually all of these things are addressed in our policies and procedures. As we continue to review them, there's some places we can tighten up the language, like the duty to intervene. We can definitely have a separate section for that. Other things here, the force continuum, we have it. It's more of a matrix. We don't have it really as a continuum, but we can shore that up. But the ban on the chokeholds and the strangleholds, I'm in 100% agreement of that, except for a deadly force, life-threatening situation. That's the only time it should be used. That is considered lethal force. And I think we need to be very, very careful when we start banning things, because everything isn't cookie cutter. And I'm not justifying excessive force at all, but use of force a lot of times is not pretty. It's ugly. It can be violent. If you've never been in a fight with a person who doesn't want to get handcuffed or who's trying to hurt you, sometimes all you have might be, if you're on the ground and you're fighting, you don't want to pull your weapon out because that person might take it from you and then shoot you. What are you left with? You can't do the same thing with your taser, because you pull your taser out, they can take that from you, it falls to the ground, and now it's a weapon for the arrestee. So in those situations, you might have to utilize deadly force to save your life or to save the life of somebody else. Just as if there was a rock next to you and you happen to grab it. That's not in the policy of a rock, but what are you left to do? And I think you're going to find, and I'll speak for Connecticut police chiefs because we had meetings on that, almost universal consensus and agreement on that. 100%, it should not be used for a restraint at all. 100% ban it. But in a life-threatening situation, I think that should be an exception.
All right. I'm going to try to stop this share. Hopefully this works. There we go.
All right, perfect.
You can all see it. All right, good. That was my first effort. Chief Riddick, there was at the rally last week, there was a really interesting exchange between 5th District State Senator Derek Slapp and Janae Wood, who was one of the organizers of the event. And the term defund the police was used. Now, obviously, Ronnie and I have had time to research and really understand what's behind that, but I think a lot of people don't understand what's behind that. Can you talk about that issue and how you view the West Hartford Police Department, the department you're the chief of? What could be done potentially to follow that missive?
All right, first we need to identify and define what defund the police is. That word has been used interchangeably to mean different things. Some people, when they say defund the police, mean totally get rid of, disband the police department and replace it with a different entity, some type of public safety agency or unit. Obviously, I would not be in favor of that. Other people, when they say defund the police, it's a reallocation of funding to other places, other departments within the town. I'm not in favor of that for West Hartford. 'cause I don't think we have any fat in our budget. As I mentioned the other night, I was always taught throughout the year. I've been doing budgets since 2009 when I was a deputy chief in the Waterbury Police Department. So I have a lot of experience with that. I was always taught, ask for what you need, and sometimes ask for some things that you might want, but be honest and put that in a different line item and clearly say, this is not a need. This is something we would like to have. That being said, our West Hartford police budget is extremely lean. And as I mentioned the other night, 94%, 94.2% of our budget is for salaries and benefits. 4.3% is for fixed costs like our CAD system, service maintenance contracts, and the like. And another 1.3 to 1.7% or so is what we call discretionary line item with discretionary funding for training, equipment, and the like. It's not a lot of money, roughly $200,000 or so. You really can't do a lot with that. That's how lean our budget is. Now, do I believe that there's some things that the police department is doing that should be better served by different divisions or different departments? I do. Do I think that means a reduction in our funding? No, I don't, because we do a lot of things. I think what should be happening is, and I'm just not saying that West Hartford's not doing this, but I'll speak globally, is if we all think back in all of our lives, I think we're all around the same age. My hair dye helps me out a little bit more, so I might look a little younger, but I'll be 54.
Mine too.
Right. I'll be
Mine too.
50. I'll be 54 this year. Is one of the first things that are cut many times in budget is social services. You think about the state, what happens? So the people who most need the services the most, who need assistance the most, that's what gets cut. The police department it's more universal. You call the police for almost everything, including fires. The police department still gets called. Mental health. Is that really our niche? No, but we understand we're primary many times, we should be secondary. The panhandling, yes, it's a quality of life issue, but the underlying factor for many of them, not all, is mental health or addiction, and leading on to addictions and social services. Those are things that should be better served by other divisions and with the state and other agencies, and that is necessarily what the police department should be involved in. So over the years, other police departments, as I think you may know, and actually I think in the Haven Police Department might be one, they have a needle exchange that goes through the police department. I mean, there's certain things that we have expanded in law enforcement, public safety, that really go beyond our skill set. Again, we could be secondary, but for us to be primary, I don't think that's the case. So I think our budget is lean. I think it's appropriate. And I don't think there's any fat there that should be siphoned off from us to another department.
Ronnie, you want to handle that online question?
Sure. I'm going to ask this question. This question's from Eric Bergen. It was posted on Facebook, and it says, for Chief Riddick, thanks for being a courageous leader on this topic recently. Many of us struggle to have conversations with people who answer Black Lives Matter with Blue Lives Matter. I appreciate all the work police officers do, but using that as a retort seems problematic. I often see it coming from law enforcement officers and their families, in the past from West Hartford officers I know, though not so much recently. Is there anything you do to talk with your officers about this? Do you see it and hear it among your ranks? And if so, what's your reaction? If not, what would be your reaction if you did? Is there any advice for the rest of us when we see or hear it?
Oh, Chief, we've lost you. Did you mute us?
Am I back?
Yeah, there you
Yes.
go.
Sorry about that. Long fingers, hard to control sometimes. Thank you, Mayor, for laughing. Make me feel good. You always laugh at my jokes. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I'm here for you.
To be able to talk to the entire police department on this is hard to do. We're budgeted for 132, and if you add our civilian personnel, it's 154, 153. But and I'm going to step into a controversial subject here, so you guys really put me on the spot. But I'm not going to shy away from it. The problem, when I hear the Blue Lives Matter, that's what goes back to the problem and the divide with the African American community again. because it's almost like, well, because you said Black Lives Matter, we have to say Blue Lives Matter or All Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter doesn't mean the other white lives or blue lives don't matter. We're just saying, hey, we're here. You know, we are human. You know, look at us. And the history proves that we haven't been treated equally. We've been treated as less than. That's all that's saying. When the Boston bombing occurred and it was Boston strong and everybody was saying that, okay, there was still violence. Does that mean that we didn't care about the rest of the country at that time? The Nevada shooting, Nevada, the mass massacre, Nevada strong. Does that mean that you didn't care about the other parts of the country? No. If you're putting a fire out at a house in a neighborhood and that house is burning and the firefighters come and put out that fire, does that mean that they don't care about the other parts of the neighborhood? No, that water is placed upon where the fire is at. And over the years, the fire has been prejudice and racism. So unfortunately, when you hear these other, white lives matter, blue lives matters, all lives matter, it's, in my opinion, it creates a bigger divide. And I fully recognize by talking to some of my white colleagues and friends that I have that they take offense because it almost seems like it's mutually exclusive. If you say Black Lives Matter, that means the rest of them don't. And it's just the opposite. Just want to be seen and heard. That's all. And history has proven that has not been the case.
Just a personal comment, Chief Riddick, is I'm grateful and happy to see, my opinion, I think Black Lives Matter is now really becoming mainstream. And I think that's a critical phase or critical step for understanding. And I think it seems like it really has moved center stage, if you will, through these last 2.5 weeks.
I agree. I think the George Floyd murder was a watershed moment. I really think a lot of people in the country said, oh, I get it. This is what they've been talking about for years upon years upon years. And you look at the callousness and the lack of empathy and caring that former officers faced. I'm not going to give him the dignity of saying his name. I think people got it. It's like, how could you do this for 8.5 minutes? How?
Ronnie, do we have any more questions online?
Can I just?
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, Mary.
Kristen Williams, a UConn basketball player, did the house on fire. If you just go to Google and you see the demonstration of it was so crystal clear that I just, a couple people that we've had that conversation, I showed them this and they're like, oh, okay. So it was just this different, rather than a defensive kind of a stance, it's a really understanding what that really means. So, yeah.
So to further that, when you have Breast Cancer Awareness Month, does that mean that you don't care about the other cancers? Testicular cancer or lung cancer, pancreatic cancer? No, it's just you're highlighting one particular problem.
Ronnie, any more online questions or?
So there is another one, but now I've lost it. It's a question that goes back to a video, and I can't watch the video now, so I think I can't really ask this question because it doesn't make sense if you
no, if it's out of context, I don't think we should ask.
It's out of context. So no, that was the only other one, and I have not gotten texted any questions. But I mean, I think what I'd love to hear, we have a couple minutes left from both of you, and I don't know if John, if you have any other questions that you need to ask, but when we're maybe coming out of, I hope coming out of this pandemic, I hope going through, this being a watershed moment, coming to maybe a new realization about how racism should be fought. How do you see West Hartford kind of on the other end of this near term and maybe, a year from now? Do you foresee any changes in the town, in the police force, in the community?
Is that for me or for the mayor?
That's really for both of you. If Shari, if you need to go, if you want to go first, it looks like something's going on in your house there.
No, I want the chief to go first, and then I'll.
Okay.
Okay. The great thing about West Hartford, and I can speak from experience of especially being in a former police department for 24 years. Prior to that, I actually started in Ansonia back in '93 for a year. But West Hartford has always been looked at as cutting edge, progressive, and professional. And we will continue to do that, to push the envelope, to be the best, to be at the forefront of change. I think when you look at this 8 can't wait, and the fact that Chief Gove and his administration, and going even prior to that, that a lot of these policies were in place way back in 2013, 2014. Things that were made law last year have been in the policy here for years. That's the type of town that we live in. That's the type of police department that we have. And I'm just honored to have the privilege to work alongside some great people, some great leaders in this town who are not afraid to take challenges and to make a difference and take a stand, as we're seeing. So I see us coming out of this thing better than we were before. We can see it over. Listen, it gets bad before it gets better. It's really bad right now, but it has to get better. And I'm just very happy to have the type of intellectual, socially conscious, empathetic, and caring people who are brave and tolerant when need be, and intolerant in the right places. But we will definitely push forward and continue to be what West Hartford has been and will be going forward.
Mayor Cantor?
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, John and Ronnie, for inviting me to participate. We are so lucky. I feel so blessed, and our town manager, one of the best decisions he made was to hire Chief Riddick. So it was one of his early decisions, and I will say I think it's been one of his best decisions. So this is going to be a painful period in a lot of ways. And I think George Floyd was a watershed moment. There's no question at the murder, but the buildup with COVID and all the inequities that were in that, just woven in a way that I think so many people, our society did not realize. I think a lot of people knew it, but it wasn't highlighted in the same way. I mean, it's just, so I think all of these things that have been extraordinarily painful have brought us to a point of a realization and a reckoning and an awakening that we can't go, we have to step forward in a very big way. And I am, again, inspired by so many people that have reached out to say, are going to help us along this path and be, again, engage in growth and knowledge, education, and real true growth, so we don't slip and we don't go back. I think West Hartford is better than most communities. We still there's lots of things that we need to change. When we look at our education system and the students that are excelling in AP classes, they don't reflect the population in a way. Well, we have 74 primary languages spoken in our schools that are other than English. So we're an incredibly diverse community. As our superintendent says, we represent the state of Connecticut. Well, let's be that stellar example of what we can do. We are better than most, but we can do better. And I think that consciousness of always working together to make ourselves better, to really listening. And for white people, I think we have a really important role to not just speak, but to truly listen. And I just wanted to leave, there's a few really good books that I'm actually have started, White Fragility, but that keeps coming up as one of the top books to talk about just racism and anti-racism. How to Be an Anti-Racist is another book. So You Want to Talk About Race, Me and White Supremacy, and Between the World and Me. But I'm happy to share those. If there's a list of 10 or 20, I think, that were on the Washington Post site or a New York Times site recently. But really important for us to have those discussions. and those history lessons of the start at 1619 and what has happened since then, and the continuity of all those moments that we haven't changed. So we will be stronger. I think we were going to be more creative. I think I see so much more collaboration between departments than I've seen before, that I know we're going to come out on the other side working in a way that is looking and appreciating all of the connectivity that we do have, because as we're disconnected, I think we really miss all of that. So we're going to come out stronger. There's no question. We still have more pain to go through to get there, but we can bring each other along and help each other. So I thank you for being community leaders and for all that you do. And Chief, your leadership has been truly inspiring and really and so solid. And we need you, and we're grateful for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Ronnie, any last words, Ronnie, before I sign out?
Other than just thank you really to, thank you, John, for hosting this and for dealing with our technical problems all day today. And thank you, Mayor Cantor, Chief Riddick, for your leadership and for your agreeing to be part of this and to talk with the community, and for just being so honest and open and transparent and really sharing and really caring. And that's very, very much obvious.
John, can I jump in for 30 seconds? I know we don't have much time.
As long as you want. Yes,
Okay, thank you. Ronnie, you mentioned, I'm not sure which group you mentioned with the changes, but are you talking about posts? Because I'm on the post council, and we voted on several changes earlier this morning at 9 a.m., which are coming forward. The compliance to law enforcement standards and practices, it's called CLESP, and one of them was the ban on chokeholds, with that exception, as well as making it mandatory for a duty to intervene and a duty for de-escalation. So now, once these are promulgated, every police department in the state of Connecticut will be required to adhere to those standards. So that's just 3 out of, I think, 8 that we put forward today.
Mayor Cantor, thank you.
Bye-bye, thank you. And Chief Riddick, no, I was talking about the governor. Governor has a task force on police accountability that had some recommendations that came out. I believe it was yesterday morning.
Yep.
The hard thing about this is I can't have all those documents in front of me while I'm on this screen. I think I need about 3 computer screens. You will notice that I had a legal pad. I'm out of my normal reporter's notebooks, but I was taking some notes as we were talking. But I mean, I think there's a lot of changes coming down that we'll all need to sift through. But this is more the changes that they're going to be asking the legislature when they come back into session to take a look at.
Okay. Well, just so you know, those were ones that were put in place today for all police departments.
So.
All righty, Mayor Cantor, who had to leave the call a moment ago. Chief Riddick, thank you. We are grateful to have you both on the show, and we are grateful to have you in our community. For Ronnie Newton, I'm John Lyons, concluding this westweha.com roundtable news event. Thanks, folks.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Stay here.